Good afternoon. A very warm welcome to this latest edition of our webinar series. I'm Jeff Hogg, a clinician scientist based between the University of Birmingham and University Hospitals Birmingham. And this, for those of you who are joining for the first time, is the webinar series of the NHS supported incubator of AI and digital healthcare. And we are a cross-sector community that aims to collectively advance regulatory science and innovation. And in doing that, this webinar series is a really important vehicle. It's a demand-led webinar series that's based on kind of questions and points of interest we hear from the community. And it gives us the opportunity to invite experts on to share their work and insights in key areas, giving us the chance to dig into those topics and answer some of those questions if we can, or at least hear some of the challenges. The format of these sessions holds that in mind. So very soon we'll be able to enjoy me being quiet and a presentation from our guest speaker today. And we'll be in listening mode for that part, but you'll notice a Q&A button somewhere down the bottom here. And I'll encourage you to type away any questions you have whilst we go there so that we can dig into them at the end. We'll have ample space there for any discussion and questions. But if we don't get to them, don't worry. We really value those to help us think about what kind of topics and talks we want to dig into next. But if Zoom allows, then I'll try and invite you to speak to your comment and unmute you, or failing that, I'll read it out. Just as another point of housekeeping, we'll be recording today's session and we'll host it on our website, so you can have a look back at it at a later date or recommend it to any colleagues or contacts who weren't able to join us this afternoon. So today we're going to be looking all the way over to the right-hand side of the translational pathway, which is post-market surveillance. With new and context-sensitive technologies like AI, this post-market surveillance or active use stage is where risks often present themselves. And medical device regulation makes post-market surveillance an obligation for manufacturers, but we've also seen the need for adopter input alongside manufacturers for this post-market surveillance to be at its best. That idea of adopter involvement is also enshrined in guidance from national bodies like NHS England guidance on AI scribes from earlier this year, and more recently the Royal College of Radiologists guidance on post-market surveillance, which we're very fortunate that today's speaker helped to produce. So it's a real pleasure to be able to invite Dr. Sarim Ather to speak to us today, who has first-hand experience of the challenges of delivering this kind of monitoring too, and has been working hard with others to distill some of the best practices around it. Sarim's a consultant musculoskeletal radiologist. He's director of the Oxford Clinical AI Research Group, OxCAIR, and he's a member of the Royal College of Radiologists AI Advisory Committee. And today's talk is kindly lined up for us is on post-market surveillance of clinical AI, a practical playbook for the NHS, for NHS teams. So thanks very much, Sarim, for joining us. And I just noticed that Richard has raised his hand. Richard, do you mind putting something in the chat? Assuming everything's, I think from everybody else's feedback, there's no problems with the audio and things. So we'll have a look at that and get back to you. But Sarim, can I hand over to you? Thanks very much.
Thanks so much for the invite. My Zoom is telling me that I'm sharing my screen.
It looks fantastic.
Coming across. You can see it.
Yeah, and coming through loud and clear too. Thank you.
That's great. Yeah, thank you so much for the kind introduction and for the invite to speak today. The topic of my conversation, as you mentioned, is sort of around post-market surveillance. And as you said, there is a regulatory obligation for AI developers to have a post-market surveillance program in place. So what I'm today talking about isn't necessarily sort of that legal requirement. It's more to do with the monitoring of the sort of the real world monitoring of these tools and their performance, and how, excuse me, as adopters, we sort of ought to have a look at how these tools are performing. Are they doing, what we expect them to do? Is the performance what we expected, or is it changing over time? I've been working in sort of AI for a little while, so have worked with a number of AI vendors, and have received funding from various funding bodies as well. So just listed here. And this particular project relates to some work we did as part of an innovative UK funded project called Accelerating Trustworthy AI. And we developed a monitoring tool working alongside some of the NHS trusts and some AI developers. And I'll talk about what that tool does a bit later. Um, Jeff, you also kindly referred to the RCI guidance, which went out to consultation earlier. So the final form hasn't been published yet, but I can share some of the general themes which have been published as part of the consultation process today. And the idea was to sort of provide a practical guide to adopters, because radiology is at the forefront of adoption of AI at the moment, just because of the tools that are available in the market. And for the departments to be able to see, okay, if we are developing AI, if we are adopting AI, what should we be doing? So this is sort of a whistle drop why, how, and what of monitoring of AI tools. So as I mentioned, my specialty leads the way for AI in healthcare. Um, and I think sort of three quarters of the regulatory approved AI tools at last counting were radiology related. And the applications spread across multiple different modalities, so different subspecialty, different modalities. And this is because computer vision was sort of one of the first areas where AI was applied. Um, and in the wild, this led to things like applications like self-driving cars, like facial recognition. But in medical imaging, radiology sort of had a ready database of images which could be looked at for AI development. And the other areas where AI is furthest advanced is also computer vision related predominantly within healthcare. So, retinal photography, dermatology imaging, pathology imaging, things like that. And we definitely have a need for some help with our image interpretation. So, our imaging volumes are going up year on year. We've got a growing shortage because we can't train people fast enough to be able to cope with the imaging demand. And as a result, we have big backlogs, which we spend lots of money to overcome by sort of outsourcing um, reporting to private companies. And there's lots of AI being rolled out. So there've been lots of programs where AI has been rolled out across different areas. There's the um, AI deployment platform, which was rolled out to some of the hospitals in the Thames Valley region and the East Midlands region. There is the AI deployment fund, which led to funding being given to half the country to adopt AI tools. A lot of almost all of the stroke networks in the country have AI-based imaging in place. So yeah, there has been sort of several centralized NHS fundings and also guidelines which have led to adoption of tools at scale. So I mentioned stroke. There's the National Optimum Stroke Imaging Pathway, which suggests that we should have some AI in there to help speed up um, stroke imaging or stroke treatment pathways. Um, the AIDF, as I mentioned, was around chest X-rays predominantly, and some chest CTs as well. The lung cancer screening program has also widely adopted nodule detection tools, and there are more applications to come. So we've got a multi-center trial ongoing at the moment, or just about to start, on fracture detection. There is a big trial called Edith being worked up around the use of mammography, AI in mammography and breast cancer screening. And Leeds Teaching Hospital are leading a prostate MRI AI-led pathway. So, there is more work being done in the area. So, but why do we need to monitor? Um, these tools have already achieved regulatory approval. Lots of them have published literature about the accuracy, but sort of that degree of evidence, the retrospective evidence, does not necessarily guarantee real world reliability. And it's, possible that indeed it happens, that the performance changes over time. So you need the AI applications to be evaluated on an ongoing basis beyond sort of that basic regulatory compliance. And from my experience so far, that independent audit and benchmarking are crucial for developing trust and safety. Um, So this is a head-to-head comparison that we did of three fracture detection tools, where we looked at, all these tools that they've got great performance, great sensitivity, specificity. But when we tested it on a data set where we had three experts, musculoskeletal radiologists, ground truthing the images, and then looked at the performance of the tools, it varied. And one tool is very sensitive but not so specific. Another one was more specific but not so sensitive, and then one which had the optimum balance of performance in the data set that we had. Similarly, we did a similar exercise with several chest X-ray tools, and there's a cluster of good performers in the top right, but there's certainly a couple that you'd want to stay clear of because they're nowhere near the performance of the best in class. So doing that independent performance, I'm not saying that everyone needs to do this themselves, but at least from an NHS point of view, having some sort of a reference data set where the tools can be benchmarked as part of either procurement process or as part of ongoing quality assurance is really important. And then we've seen literature come out talking about the performance of the tools that are being used in practice. So this was a paper published about a stroke detection algorithm, which has a sensitivity of about 65%. And this is about one particular commercial algorithm, but actually there have been studies which have done comparative analysis, and they found that actually all of them have a comparable performance, which is fine, but that's just something that we need to be aware of. And then some more work needs to be done that, is the performance the same across all vendors and all patient demographics, or is there a differential performance? Are we disadvantaging certain groups because the AI doesn't work as well in those groups? Similarly, we did an audit on a vertebral fracture detection tool where we looked at its accuracy at detecting osteoporotic fractures, and it had a sensitivity around 70%. Now, that's still a lot better than what the radiologists were achieving, not because, there's a national audit done by the Royal College looking at how often radiologists are flagging up these fractures, and, the performance was around 10%. So it's a big improvement on the status quo, but there is room for improvement further. And similarly, we've got I mentioned lung detection algorithm. We've got one of those in the lung screening program that we run, um, and the tool detects and measures the nodules. But even its advertised performance is that it's got a sensitivity of 92% for every one false positive that you pick up. So, we know that it doesn't work perfectly, but we want to be able to monitor when that performance might be degrading. And also whether, this advertised performance actually carries through to real life. So again, this is an example where the AI said no nodule found, but actually, the radiologist picked up that there is an abnormality on the scan and referred the patient onto PET CT, which confirmed that there was an abnormality there. Again, it's about excuse me, it's about knowing when the AI will work and not work so well. So I'll come to this a bit later, but that ongoing monitoring isn't just about, the AI is either really is perfect or is not great and we shouldn't be using it. It's about knowing where the AI works well, where it doesn't work so well, and making sure that as the human oversight, we can monitor those areas. And there's also concept data drift. So the AI at the moment, the algorithms are trained they are validated, and then they're released. And they've been trained on a particular type of data. And if the input data changes where they're being applied, then the performance may change. So, for example, if in the imaging context, if you have a new scanner and the AI hasn't seen that data before, then there might be a sudden change in performance. It may be that you are aggregating data from multiple sites which have scanners of different types, and over time you're going uh, on a scanner upgrade program. So you might not see a sudden shift, but over time you might see a gradual shift in performance. It may be that your scanner is getting older and it's just not producing the same pictures, and that might lead to a gradual shift in performance. Or it may be that you've got your scanner is undergoing maintenance. You've had to bring a makeshift van with an MRI scanner, and you have a different performance from that scanner compared to what you usually have. And when that switches over, you go back to baseline. And I've used imaging again as an example, but you can extrapolate that to other AI tools as well. And again, this we've seen that in real life. So this is a paper published up in Scotland where they had AI being applied to mammography cases, and they had a software upgrade on the mammography tool, and suddenly the patients who were recalled because AI was calling them abnormal suddenly jumped. Um, and that happened at two separate units. So, that this is real. It's not a theoretical thing. And similarly, when we upgraded our nodule detection software, as I mentioned earlier, the tool does two things. It detects the nodules and it also measures them. So we had a cohort of scans where they were analyzed both by the old version of the software and the new version of software. And we found that actually there was disagreement between them in both the number of nodules. So this is how often, so there's a difference of up to 13 nodules or 11 nodules in either direction um, between the two software versions. But also the measurement. So if it does detect the same volume, the same nodule, it can make different measurements. And when we looked at it, because the follow-up is determined by how big the nodule is, or the change in size of the nodule. So when we looked at it, 20% of the patients that were analyzed by both versions of software would have ended up on different patient pathways, depending on what software version you use. So again, that's something to be mindful of. So hopefully I've sort of given some examples about why monitoring matters in AI. AI is not a static device. It will change over time. It's a software tool. So as the software changes, as the input data changes, as the population might change. So, for example, you might be using AI in a low prevalence setting, like a screening setting, and it might have a certain performance because you have lots of negative scans there. And suddenly you've then put that in a high prevalence setting in, I don't know, in an oncology center, and suddenly your baseline prevalence changes, then that will also change the performance of the or overall performance of the AI. So yeah, there's a risk of bias and error in new settings. So again, if you're changing the baseline data, then you just need to be mindful of how the AI is performing. Um, and the analogy, and it doesn't fit perfectly, but the analogy one that could be used is sort of having an MOT check for your AI tool. And MOT checks are periodic but ongoing. But the point remains that it's not just about getting a CE approval or FDA approval at the beginning, and then that's it. The tool is safe forever. There is a need to monitor it on an ongoing basis to ensure safety. Um, and what do you need to measure? So you want to be able to track the AI performance. So is it still accurate? Is it still in a nodule context? Is it still providing consistent measurements? Um, are the is it reliable? So in the sense that is it still processing the images that you expect it to? Um, be able to, and if any of those are lacking, then be able to identify where the errors are occurring. Are there any particular unexpected results? Is there any patient groups or disease groups that the tool is not performing as well on? Ideally, you'd want to evaluate the AI's impact on patient care and clinical workflows, although this is a bit harder. Um, and then working with the vendors to make sure that you can comply with regulatory requirements as well. Um, and it's a lot of work, doing this. So as part of AI adoption, we also need to make sure that sort of any business case that we build to adopt AI also has somebody with the oversight in mind. And that person, should have dedicated time to be able to do this. In the context of the Royal College, they've built a registry. So they're quite keen for people to inform the college when new radiology AI tools are deployed, so you can have national visibility. And if there's any issues with any AI tools, there can be some shared learning. But also, if the AI tools are working well, if a new trust wants to adopt something, they know who they can ask for a bit of experience. Um, and then making sure that you work with the suppliers to make sure that they can also meet their post-market surveillance responsibilities. Um, Radiology specific, but there is uh, the CQC oversee the ionizing radiation regulations, and they have recently said that if there's any software which is involved in interpretation of imaging where there's a radiation exposure, so that's X-ray, CTs, fluoroscopy images, then you need to have an inventory of those tools within the department, and they've got a list of things about the tool which the inventory needs to have. Um, so you need to have the name of the software company, the brand name, the current version, when it was installed. So this again becomes a legal requirement for the adopter to comply with the IRMA regulations. Um, excuse me. Then once so you've got your registry, then you've got to decide, okay, what do we need to measure? And in the RCR guidance, they define the three-piece framework, which is around human AI interaction, the workflow integration, and the algorithm performance. And they're just as important as each other. Um, and once you've sort of worked that out, then you need to audit the AI outputs against the reference standard. So that might be the radiology report, that might be a pathology report, or the patient outcome. In this human AI interaction, you want to be able to track the human AI disagreements and assess the clinical impact, because you want to be able to see if there's over reliance on AI or under reliance on AI. You want to monitor performance of different patient demographics and scanners. As I mentioned, change in scanners can markedly impact AI performance. Is AI consistently missing a certain type of pathology? So you just need to make sure that if it is, then that requires, in the short term, better oversight, but also then work with the vendors to be able to correct that in their subsequent versions of the tool. In terms of the workflow integration, you want to be able to make sure that the AI is processing the cases as you'd expect it to, is doing it in a timely fashion, and then monitor the impact of AI on downstream clinical decisions. So if you've got a fracture detection tool, is it now led to more people being sent to fracture clinic? Has it led to more CTs being requested because it's got high false positive rate, for example, or conversely, has made a positive impact and stop patients coming back having to be recalled from A&E because all their fractures get picked up at the first time. So as I mentioned, as part of our Innovate UK project, we developed a tool that sort of helps to do some of that work in the radiology context. So it has a natural language processing tool built in, and it takes the radiology imaging and the radiology report, extracts metadata from that, and then creates some dashboards which you can use to sort of monitor AI performance on a longitudinal basis. and see whether it meets the benchmark that was set at the time that it was installed. So, for example, if you're expecting 90% concordance, you can track that over a period of time and see if that's still valid. Um, in this case, the AI tool picked up multiple findings, so we can track, okay, is the performance worse on a particular pathology compared to others? We can see how the performance is in different patient demographics. We can see how the tool performs on different device types, um, on different device models. So yeah, if, for example, there's one device that the AI is performing really badly on, but then when we looked into it, we found that actually this is a mobile scanner, so the quality of imaging isn't as good compared to a fixed system. So we were able to find that out, but it's nothing you can do about it, but it's just something to be mindful of. But also be able to then review, so you've got dashboards where we can review um, all the false positive or false negative cases to see, is this an AI error? Is this the reporting error, or is this something within the report that has been picked up by the NLP tool? Once you have identified the issue, then you have to take action. So if there's any patient safety related issues, any adverse events which have been defined by MHRA as events that cause or almost cause an injury to someone or affect a treatment or diagnosis. So there is a MHRA website where these can be reported, but it may be that actually you want to do something more locally first before it gets to that point. And that might, involve working with the vendor to update the algorithm. It may be changing back to an older version of the tool if the new version isn't quite working and things like that. And as part of AI deployment, there will be departmental risk management processes, and those need to be referred to when issues arise. Within radiology, we have a culture of learning meetings and clinical governance meetings, and I'm sure that applies in other specialties as well. So for wider learning, it's really important to discuss AI failures or where AI has really helped with patient management for that to be discussed within these meetings. Um, as I mentioned, if the performance changes, it's really important to work with the vendor closely to discuss the reasons to recalibrate or upgrade the model. Um, we just really need to be really, really vigilant if there's any change in the input data. So change of scanner, change of AI model, change of image processing software update, all those kind of things can really affect the AI performance. So that's something to be really mindful of. And if there has been issues, I'm sure you won't be the only one experiencing them. To share them across the NHS network, and the Royal College of Radiologists encourages the use of the registry, but I'm sure similar process exists elsewhere. So, with our tool, we can have like a monthly report generated to say whether the performance is satisfactory or not. If it is, then great. If not, then you can, as I said, work out, is this an AI algorithm issue? Is this a device issue? Or is this a training issue with the AI use? Um, the document doesn't touch a lot on the training aspect because sort of it's not completely in the remit. But it does say that all end users should be used in the use of AI tool prior to the clinical deployment. And there's some core things that the training should include. So you need to know which patient groups and imaging modalities the AI will work on. So, for example, you're not using a tool that should only be used in adults in a pediatric population. Um, but also knowing that not all tools pick up all abnormalities. So if a tool so this is a real example. There was a head CT tool which was being used to prioritize which scans should be reported first, and it picked up hemorrhage and it picked up some of the other abnormalities, but it didn't pick up hydrocephalus. And there was a patient with hydrocephalus who then got deprioritized because the it wasn't picked up as a priority scan by the AI. So again, in your clinical pathway, you just need to make sure that the limitations of the tool don't adversely impact the patient management. And also knowing, and sometimes this information is readily available to the vendors, other times not. But there will be strengths and weakness of the algorithm. So the algorithm we using for lung nodule detection was prone to making errors near the mediastinum. So again, that should be then the human review area if needs to be. Um, and with end user education, we've sort of got a simulation platform which can be used for training. So essentially, it allows people to have a hands-on approach to training where they can see real-world cases with the AI being applied. And what we've seen is that with the use of that simulation training, um, the performance improves. So it sort of that allows you to have learn about the strengths and limitations of the tool, become confident about overriding AI because I think that takes a little bit of practice, especially if you're not used to making that diagnosis yourself. So, in the context of radiology again, or even, imaging in generally, if you are a junior doctor working in the emergency department, diagnosing fractures, and an AI tool puts a big red box around a bone saying there's a fracture, then you might not feel that confident about overriding it. But if you know that it overdiagnoses clavicle fractures, and you've practiced overriding it in your training, then you'll feel a bit more comfortable about it. And you can do that in a sort of controlled non-patient setting and build confidence in how you use the tool. Um, just coming towards the end, safe AI adoption really requires robust governance mechanisms. You need to have somebody dedicated within the department or within the hospital who is taking a lead on this on the monitoring aspect, and that needs to be built in as part of the AI deployment plan. These things shouldn't just be taken and dropped into clinical practice. You need to have some sort of monitoring framework, and these things you don't need to come up from scratch. There are people who are, either have already adopted or in the process of doing it, and we can just borrow things from other places and take that forward. And that's sort of that national data sharing comes in really handy. Any learnings that you have need to be shared both locally but also nationally if possible. Um, and hopefully that will firstly ensure compliance with law. It will help build trust in AI and eventually unlock the true patient benefit that we're trying to achieve from these technologies. Thank you very much. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks so much, Sarah. That was a brilliant overview. Really insightful. And thanks, Danica, too, for dropping links to the, the various bits of work and programs of work you covered. Please do take a look if you get a chance to the audience. And hopefully we'll have some questions flowing in soon. I encourage you to get typing away. But I wondered if I could dive in first, just hearing what you're saying about the importance of planning post-market surveillance in for the business case for these deployments. With all the work that's involved there, I can really see the importance of that. Are there any kind of heuristics for doing that in terms of if you were proposing a particular product, for instance, is it about so many FTE per product of certain staff? Is it about platforms, or what are the kind of ingredients to costing that out?
I think it's difficult. I think having something in there and having a nominated person would be a start. And I think the issue is that if that's a clinical person, then there's only so much of their time you can realistically get out. And it might be an iterative process. And like I said, it's not something that you have to do at the same intensity throughout the whole process. So it will take, a lot of work up front, then maybe, uh, sort of reduced requirement, and then if you've got a model update, then that degree of involvement goes a bit further. So I think it's hard to put a number on it, but it's something that should be at least built in. And generally, you can benchmark this against the amount of work that somebody is doing, for example, in a lead for clinical governance role, which is looking at everything related to clinical governance. So probably a fraction of that. Um, but as you adopt more tools and as that work increases, then you might need to increase that as well. The other thing is, adopting tools that can help you with some of that process is also helpful.
That's really helpful to understand. And just thinking about that kind of change over time and over scale. Sometimes with the like pre-implementation evaluation, um, I hear people say that as a product builds more of a track record and you know that it's worked at this site and that site and this site, that there's not so much of a requirement maybe, or we'll rethink about how much of an emphasis we put on those kind of evaluations. Be interested to hear what you think about that, but also, do you think any of that applies to post-market surveillance as we build more familiarity with products? Will that influence how we need to invest in post-market surveillance, or do you think that's just something that's here to stay and every product should have whilst it's in place?
I think I sort of lost the thread at the beginning of your question. If you don't mind repeating.
Sorry, I was
Yes.
just talking about the kind of a dichotomy of pre-implementation evaluation. So, like you were saying, to inform a
Yeah.
procurement decision,
Yep.
and then the post-market surveillance going forward. And sometimes in that pre-implementation evaluation, you hear people talking about the challenges of imagining that every single customer wants to do its own pilot effectively, and not seeing that as viable, and seeing that as products become more mature and prevalent, we won't see much of that, or we'll see less of that. I mean, presumably, from what I'm hearing, it feels like post-market surveillance is something that we just need to do as business as usual. But I wondered if you saw that as something that might change over time as products become more familiar.
Yeah, I mean so there's two bits to it. I think we definitely need that pre-market evaluation. I don't think everybody needs to do it independently, but somebody needs to do it independently. We can't just rely on the vendors to sort of provide that because you won't be able to get that head-to-head comparison between performance. So I think somebody needs to do it independently, but not everybody needs to do it independently. Um, in terms of post-market surveillance, again, I think there's shared learnings across uh, different people using the same product, and maybe that might be a way of having to mitigate everybody having to do it. So it. Having said that, your implementation of the AI tool might be different compared to somebody else who's using it. So if you're using it in a different pathway, if your input data is different, if you're upgrading your scanner at a different time, then all those things will impact how intensely you need to monitor. But it may be that if you're again in the radiology context, if you're part of an imaging network or in for example, you're part of a screening program where the AI is being applied to all cases in a similar way, then you can just have some reference sites who are
Mhm.
doing the monitoring. And even if there are any changes locally, the local teams can work with the reference site to say, hey, we're just upgrading our scanner. Can you just have a look that this is still working okay and do some data sharing around that? But I don't think we're quite at that level of data sharing and maturity yet to be able to do that. I think going forward, it may be that we sort of set up reference sites. And to be fair, what we probably do is look at um, how medical devices have been used in the past and whether there's parallels there around how, for example, other diagnostic devices have been used, blood analyzer and things like that, and how do we monitor and make sure that they are performing at the right standard, and take those learnings and take those into sort of the AI-based diagnostic devices.
Yeah, that's a really helpful point. Um, I'm going to hand over next, and I'm going to try to unmute Mania Hussein, who's got a question around transparency. Um, Mani, I think you're free to speak. Hopefully, you're unmuted.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Perfectly. Thank you.
Yep.
Over to you.
Marvelous. Fascinating talk. And just for open and transparency, I'm Director of Primary and Community Care for the Care Quality Commission, and I'm currently joining the National Commission for AI to support some of the work that they're doing. And one of my interests are that the use of AI technology and algorithms in clinical decision support. Um, do you make patients aware that you're using this technology?
Yeah. So a lot of our tools are being applied. I'm just trying to think because we use several tools, and in some of them, we have explicitly made that clear. In others, we haven't. Um, and it's been more at a trust facing level. The trust has said we use some AI in some care. And I think we're in the process of updating that and making sure that, we are we are making that explicit to patients. I think part of the challenge is that AI has been brought into the trust by different people at different times. So
Hmm.
one of our first tasks is making sure we've got, I've talked about the registry. So we've got one within the, radiology department, but there are other departments that are using AI. And at a trust level, we're trying to understand, okay, what AI is being used at the moment and by whom and on what patient groups, um, and create that sort of internal register. And we're looking at not just patient facing or direct clinical care tools, but also administrative tools. But yeah, I think that is sort of the short to medium term ambition to make sure that we can be completely transparent about where AI is being used.
Yeah, I mean, my view on transparency is that, of course, we live in a world where AI technology is infiltrating everything, from your mobile phone to what have you, and I'm always thinking ahead in terms of kind of liability and accountability. So um, there will be patients where you've got posters up saying, we use technology and what have you, and they might be aware. But just thinking ahead, if for example you're relying on AI technology and you miss something, and there's an adverse event for the patient, I can foresee that patients might then say, well, wait a minute, I wasn't aware that you were using this technology and what have you. And from my perspective, from a clinical perspective, it's always good to be open to patients on the technology that they use, such that one, they have the ability to ask you questions and what have you, show interest, um, and ultimately, if they have got any concerns, you can kind of assure them, or if they're not assured, then you might offer an alternative. So I think as we use technology, there will for patient and clinical decisions, and whether it's ambient voice technology, for consultations, what have you, I would expect patients to maybe be informed of what's being used and how it's being used, and what have you. And it's getting that balance right between implicit consent and explicit consent, and you've got to be pragmatic as well.
No, I completely agree. I think one thing to be mindful of is, should we be treating AI any different to any other technology that we're using? So, how much do patients know about other diagnostic technologies that they might be using in their care pathway? Are we explicitly telling them that you're going to have, this kind of suture or this kind of implant being put in? Um, so I think while I completely agree that we need to make patients aware of and be part of that sort of shared informed decision making. Um, I think that at the same time, just be careful that we're not sort of overdoing it with AI specifically. Having said that, it may be that we do need to, because from a patient perspective, this is a sort of a new paradigm, and they might be more interested in knowing about AI being used specifically just because of everything else, in the wider world around the use of AI. But as you said, AI is going to be prevailing. I have an AI powered washing machine, so we will have AI everywhere, and I think the lines between what's AI and what's not AI will get blurred very quickly, especially with the language models, because going forward, your ECG machine, maybe that's too much of an example, but your pulse oximeter, your monitoring devices, your anesthesia machine, all of these things will have some element of machine learning or AI built in. And so yeah, I think that will get blurred quite quickly if it hasn't done so already. And in a imaging context, all the scanners that we get now, the software have some sort of AI built in for either image acceleration or improving the image quality, and we aren't explicitly telling our patients. I know this for sure, that all the image reconstruction is being done. So, pretty much every patient we scanned has some that we scan has some sort of AI applied in their care pathway because the scanner is automatically using AI to correct or improve image quality. So, yeah, I think it's just about working out the right balance.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the reality is it's the context, isn't it? I mean, you would expect, technology to enhance something in imaging and what have you. But I think as we move along this journey, where at some point where basically AI will be, it'll be more than clinical support. It's for a group of images, it's going to actually say, that's there isn't any malignancy there or any anomaly there. When we get to that point, I think there'll be an element of patients trying to understand, you know, is it the clinician making the final decision here, or is it the AI who, which more or less has made the decision for the clinician and what have you? And I'm also a firm believer in a degree of human oversight. But I think this will be interesting debates as technology moves forward and we utilize it and we do rely on it for efficiency and optimization. Thank you.
Thanks, both.
Great. I know Jeff's keen to move on, but just quickly to come back on that, I think absolutely. I think um, for sort of AI to truly achieve its potential, it needs to replace some of the work that we're doing. And they will be, we're looking at certain use cases where, with the CERSI group as well, around, if you start talking about taking human out of the loop, what does the governance look like? And certainly in that scenario, um, patients need to be completely aware. I guess you will never have the human completely out of the loop because you'll still need the oversight and monitoring at a certain level. And if you're going down that direction, you have to then define what that degree of oversight looks like.
Thanks very much. I'm going to bring in Philippa Ryan next to speak to a question. So hopefully, Philippa, you find yourself unmuted.
Hi, thank you.
That's great.
Yes, so very interesting talk, thank you. So we did some work, I work at the University of York on looking at an AI comorbidity decision tool, and we found, looking at our training data, that actually it performed quite poorly for some demographics versus others. And one of the things we talked about was what you talked about, which was about letting the staff know, okay, it's not necessarily going to perform as well for this patient, for example, the one that sat in front of you. But we were concerned about sort of generally undermining trust in the AI system by saying, actually, it doesn't work very well in these cases. And I wondered if you had any thoughts on how you might sort of balance that difference between saying, okay, it might not be working here versus, somebody then assuming it's never working, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, there is that risk one way or the other, right? Because those AI failings will bubble up one way or the other. So I think it's probably better to sort of try to spot them and discuss them early on. Um, and also from a learning point of view, also sort of if there is human AI disagreement and the AI is correct, then highlight those cases as well. So it works both ways. And the value of AI might not be so in the stroke algorithm, for example, the value of AI might not be in detecting every case, but it's about detecting the cases which need urgent attention and being able to highlight them. And at a population level, we're still making an improvement, even though it might not work perfectly at every patient level. So I think, yeah, it's a balance of um, having I'm just trying to think sort of, in your clinical governance framework, you have a risk register, and to achieve clearance, you have to have the right risk benefit balance. So it's about sort of that ongoing monitoring of that risk and benefit balance. And if the risks outweigh the benefits, then you ought to stop it. but you need to be able to track the benefits as well as chart the risks.
So that's more of a sort of across all the population, but if it's showing sort of poorer performance for a specific demographic, then you might be exacerbating some inequalities that are already there.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's more of a sort of ethical question in the sense that, let's say, there's an AI tool that improves uh, treatment in the over 60 cohort, but doesn't work well in the under 60 cohort. Do you deny the over 60s the use of that algorithm? Do you just limit the use of the algorithm to that over 60s cohort? What do you do? So I think, again, it's not an easy answer because by denying everybody of that, you are then denying potential, beneficial treatment to the over 60 cohort. So it may be that the tools have, and again, this works the same with drugs, right? So they might have a population specific clearance. And maybe that's something that we need to look towards in algorithms as well.
Thank you.
Thanks both. It's a really interesting conversation. Really important points about subgroup performance. Next, it's a pleasure to unmute the speaker from last month and also one of your collaborators, Sarim, Ridian Bramley. I'll hopefully have just unmuted you, Ridian.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, loud and clear.
Hi. Thank you, Sarim. Great talk there. I wanted to ask really around from the supplier's perspective. I came across a publication in JMIR just recently that looked at digital health technologies, and it was quite shocking, really, that only a quarter of digital health technologies used in the NHS, when they did a freedom of information request on trusts, only a quarter were actually compliant with safety standards, DCB 0129 that the suppliers have to do, and the 0160 that the trusts have to do. And clearly, we want to get better than that with AI. And I just wanted to mention about the PMS guidance that's come in, the amendment to the regulations that came in October last year that the suppliers are supposed to comply with, and it was by June this year. And fundamental to that is they need to provide a plan of how they're going to do what you talked about today. So I was just wondering if you've seen any examples of that, or whether you've been working with suppliers, good examples of how that can be done, and should we be putting it into our procurement requirements that they have to have this in place?
So in short, answer to your last question, yes, we should. I don't know how many trusts are actually qualified to judge what a good PMS plan looks like. I think that's part of the challenge. So I remember reading the guidelines when they came out. I can't remember the exact details of what it was, but the I haven't seen any of the vendors that we've worked with provide a PMS plan to the trust. And I think from a regulatory perspective, when I spoke to the MHRA, the answer I got was that any PMS activities is between the vendor and the regulator. So, apart from sort of field safety notices, the end users don't get any feedback. So, even if you submit a yellow card report to MHRA, me as a submitter, if I do it as a clinician or at a trust level, we don't get any feedback. All those yellow card reports get collated and then discussed with the vendor. So I think sort of the end user is, I feel like, being left out of that loop. And I don't know what can be done to sort of close that gap apart from waiting for field safety notices to come out or some sort of a database where these are recorded. That, which, as far as I'm aware, doesn't exist at the moment.
Can I come back on that just quickly?
Yeah,
Sure.
please do.
Yeah, I think we've been working on this college document together, haven't we, with our colleagues? And there's an Appendix A we included in there, which is basically questions to ask your AI supplier about post-market surveillance. And there's one under regulatory compliance series. Can you provide a copy of your post-market surveillance plan as required under the MHRA post-market surveillance regulations? And I think that's a key question. I think we've just got to get used to asking it, because if we ask it, then the suppliers will be more motivated to provide it. And I think we need to publicise that this is really important that they do this. So making a statement more than a question, but I hope you agree.
No, I completely agree. I think, as I said earlier, that yeah, I think it should be part of the procurement process. I think we, as adopters, need to educate ourselves on what good PMS looks like. But then also, I think when speaking to vendors, they find it hard to get access to data to be able to do the PMS properly. So us as adopters should then be able to should be willing to share that data back with the vendors as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Sounds like a really important step as well for people. We're just coming up towards time, and thank you for all the great questions. I'd like to give the last one, if it's okay, to Pranika Anand. I'm just going to unmute you, Pranika.
Hi, I hope everyone can hear. So really a quick one. So my question was on clinicians' readiness to, basically being in a position to assess and evaluate, simply put, ask the right questions. Because if we leave it to clinicians to self-educate, that just brings individual variables. And as far as I understand, as a clinician myself who's now into research and before that with the industry, I feel it's a very long journey and it's not part of the curriculum. So what are we really doing about that?
Well, in terms of educating clinicians on how to do the
Yes, being able to ask the right questions. Yeah.
I think part of it is sort of needs to be driven nationally. So, things like the post-market surveillance guidance that the Royal College is producing. There's some NHS England guidance as well around it. So I think part of it needs to be sort of centrally driven. Then within each trust, there will be people, or should be people who have some expertise in this. So, your chief clinical information officer, for example. And I think it's then about sharing, making sure that if you're adopting AI, you've got the right people in the loop, and it shouldn't be sort of a single person or a single department exercise to be able to bring AI in. And that's been part of the problem, that we haven't had in the past quite the awareness around all the people that need to be involved. So I think it's just making sure that you've got your IG team, your clinical safety team involved in that process, and hopefully sort of with that collective wisdom, you can ask the correct questions. Yes, we can try educating clinicians at large, but if you look at so the Health Association England also published some guidance around AI training and AI education, and you have different degrees of expertise that's required within within the area. So you've got people at large, the end users of the AI, and not all of them need to have expert knowledge on AI safety. They just need to know when to use the tool, when not to use the tool, and what it can be used for. But then there will be a certain core group which need to have a better understanding of what the AI failings might be, how to spot them, how to correct them. So I think there will be a requirement to do that over time.
Thank you, Sarim, and thank you, Jeff.
Thank you both. And yeah, so all that's left is just to do a bit more thanking, really. Thank you, Sarim, for making time to join us and giving such an insightful talk. Really appreciate you spotlighting this really valuable piece of guidance as well. I think that's a really valuable contribution across the community. And thank you, everybody, for dialing in to join us this evening as well. It's been a great conversation. The last thing from me is just to make a note that we are squeezing one more webinar in before Christmas. So on Tuesday, 9th of December, 4 till 5 p.m. as usual, we've got Dr. Justin Green, who's the Executive Director of Open Predictor and a prior NHS doctor, who's sharing his experience of coming from the NHS to market with a predictive analytics tool. So thanks once again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon and evening.
Thank you.